We are getting set up here. I'm Kelsey Liverpool. I am the founder and executive director of Kids Rank, and thank you for joining us for our Foundation's conversation around the mental health and well-being of military and veteran children. And so as our conversation continues, over the last several months, we've had guests come talk to us about different areas that we felt were really relevant in the support of military and veteran kids, such as education, caregivers. We talked to some military moms about the impact of service on their children. And today I'm really excited to introduce our guest from Partners in Promise, as well as one of our former parents for Kids Rank, they PCS, well, she'll always be a Kids Rank family member to me, Heather. Today we're talking about special needs and EFMP program, exceptional, did I say that right? Exceptional Family Members Program. I always have to say it out loud. And it is, I'll let our panel talk a little bit more about it. There are kind of two sides to it. And I remember as being a new spouse, when I first kind of got into this world, my daughter has a metabolic disorder, and we lived in civilian community. And it wasn't until we were trying to PCS and move to another state that we got flagged that she needed to become part of this program that I knew nothing about. So I had a new child and was trying to deal with all of the things that came with her metabolic disorder. And then the program came as really a support, but it's also sometimes very confusing, especially for, first-time parent, new spouse in the community. So today, with our panel, I'm really excited to have them join us because they're going to be able to answer some questions and really share. Heather will share her experience with having special needs children and how the program has worked and where there have been challenges, and then we'll give some resources. So I'll start with Heather, and then we'll get into Jennifer and Michelle who are here as well. So hi, Heather.
Great.
Thank you for joining us today. So I wanted to just start and have you share a little bit about your story, your amazing boys and family, and kind of what brought you here.
Okay. We have been a military family for 25 years, and my boys the oldest is now getting ready to turn 22. My middle is 18 and my youngest is 14. And it's probably been 12, 13 years ago when my oldest was 9 years old. He started having seizures and was diagnosed with epilepsy. And then 6 months later, my youngest was diagnosed with epilepsy at 1 year, 1 year of age. We have moved several times since their diagnosis, and just trying to find continuity of care, trying to keep up with all their medical records and things like that have been a challenge. But we've had some amazing support along the way, and I'm here today to kind of share and let parents know that they are not alone in dealing with this and where to find some of the resources, because when we first started with this journey, we had no clue. I had no clue where to start, and it can be a very lonely journey. So that's what I'm here today to kind of help with parents that are struggling with that.
Can you tell me, Heather, when you first found out about the diagnosis, like what that was like? Were you living in an area? Were you living at home? I know you're originally from Kentucky. Were you living close to home and had family in your area?
No, we were actually stationed in Chicago, which luckily for us, it is it's a base that has a lot of opportunity medical care. We were very fortunate with that. I was very overwhelmed. We got, like I said, the oldest got diagnosed, and then 6 months later, my youngest got diagnosed, and they had two different forms of epilepsy. which left a lot of challenges, and a lot of people didn't believe me that my youngest was having issues, but as a mom, you know your kid, and his weren't so obvious. So I didn't have a lot of support. I didn't have anyone that really understood. Even within the Naval Hospital, who we were assigned to, they really didn't have the capabilities. They were undermanned, didn't have anyone that specialized with pediatrics. So I requested to be transferred to the nearest pediatric hospital, and they just so happened to specialize in epilepsy, and that was the Children's Hospital of Wisconsin, and they were amazing. We were so sad to lose them. So yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm going to come back, and we're going to talk more to you kind of about your experience, and then also, you know, kind of what you've learned over the years, because I feel like, you know, they call it after a certain time, you become a seasoned spouse. And it's because, you know, you kind of figure out like the lay of the land and what, you know, what's happening in the systems and the processes and the hurry up and wait and all of those things.
Yeah.
And, you know, that kind of information is really valuable, but a lot of times you have to figure that out on your own. So I want to introduce now Jennifer and Michelle from Partners in Promise, because I'd love to hear about, I mean, anytime I talk to anybody about special needs and I said, oh, we're going to be talking to Partners in Promise, they're like, oh, good, that's who I was going to tell you to talk to anyway. So you guys started this organization, Michelle, and I'd like to hear more about it and kind of what brought you here to this space.
Thank you, Kelsey, for inviting Jen and I here today. We are with the Partners in Promise. So as Heather was talking about, I guess I am another seasoned spouse as well. We've been a military family for 25 years, and my daughter was born very early, 17 years ago. So we are very familiar with the EFMP program. And, you know, at times it can be frustrating. At first, we were navigating the medical side of things as far as trying to just get her appropriate access to all the medical care that we needed. And, you know, we're pretty resourceful as military spouses. It's a tedious and frustrating journey to have to go through. But once we were seeing some, you know, improvement with my daughter over time, and as she got older, that's when we started seeing the education piece. And that's where we noticed there was a lack of resources, and we needed help and support as far as protecting her rights as we moved from school district to school district. And we really saw it in the last move that we had, our fifth move as a family here to Virginia. And she had an IEP in another county within the same Commonwealth of Virginia. But when we got here, things just weren't making sense. You know, we talked about that, your gut feeling, Heather, earlier. Like she had all this wonderful support and services. And then we got here, and some of the first questions were like, oh, you're a military family. Tell me about your spouse's job. How's it going? How long are you going to be here? And then all of these wonderful supports that were in this IEP started going away, like within the first 60 days. Like, oh, you know, I saw her on the playground. She doesn't need this. She's doing great with speech. So instead of 3 times a week, let's do it 1 time a week. And then other supports that she was having, just, you know, there was all these classroom observations. They started going away. And at first I was so excited because like, oh, wow, we're doing such a good job with my daughter. It's just fantastic. You know, every parent wants to hear that, especially when you fought so hard to get them included, to get her up to speed when, you know, the doom and gloom of the doctor's like, oh, she's never going to eat, she's never going to walk, she's never going to live independently. And all of a sudden she's in this classroom. You're like having that win as a family, as a parent. But it wasn't until I think I was just a little naive at first, but then when I saw her regressing academically because those supports and services were not in place anymore, and I was being told one thing, but seeing different things on testing and her coming home and sharing things with me, not seeing certain parts of her IEP or her individualized education program being implemented the way they're supposed to, you know, red flags started going up and down. And I'm like, I need help. I know I'm not a crazy person. I'm doing my own research on the internet, trying to figure out what the rights are, what is she entitled to through the federal law. And then when I started calling, that was the problem, right? Like, I don't know who to reach out to, you know, and it's a very lonely world, you know, when you're in the EFMP, there's stigma associated with it. You can't just talk to your friend about, you know, I'm having a problem at my IEP meetings. It's just, the community is we're just torn in all different directions, and it's very unique to that child. So when I reached out to the Navy JAG office, they couldn't help me. EFMP office couldn't help me. The SLO, school liaison officers couldn't help me. There was no one locally who knew about special education as far as attorneys go. And so I just felt very isolated. And that's when I knew we need to make change. And of course, our battle, continued on with state complaints and due process hearings. And we've won everything along the way, but no family should ever go through what we've gone through. And of course, my husband's geo-batching, right? A lot of EFMP families do not live together because they stay in a place where they know they're getting adequate medical care or educational resources. So you can't just up and move sometimes. You make that decision to stay in a place and you let your spouse move to help with their career progression at times. And so my husband was gone a lot. And so you just feel very alone. And so that's when, the inspiration of Partners in Promise came about. It's just, how do we help these families who are navigating EFMP, but the education piece? There's always resources for the medical, I think where the focus was, but sometimes we're going to need a little bit of help with different school districts and different, educational placements on how to have our kids not lose those services, not have lost instruction, no regression, because that kind of happens every 2 to 3 years. And so we're here to help educate our families. We're help to make change because we're very solution-based on the legislative side. We've been working with Congress, DOD, even the local state levels. We've come a long way, but we need to get EFMP standardized across the branches so everyone's doing the same thing and all the resources are the same across the board. Anyway, I kind of went into circles there, but Jen could tell you about the other part of the journey because I'm the seasoned spouse, but she's got the other part of the journey.
Well, I mean, I'm a Navy spouse and I'm pretty salty myself. I've been almost a Navy spouse for 15 years. So while in one area I am, seasoned, I've been around the block kind of with the military life, OCONUS, a few tours. I've dealt with deployments. We finally started having our kids. I didn't really have any connection to EFMP or special education until as a military family reporter, I interviewed Michelle. And so I had been doing reporting for Military Families Magazine, Military Spouse, and others. And I really was always drawn to helping advocate and tell stories. And so when I heard Michelle's story of, not only is she a military spouse that has done what I had done, she's lived in Japan before, we had a similar story. And I'm thinking back to my time there and how alone I felt just myself and with my family, and let alone having to advocate in such a way that you're going to court alongside your child. I was in a situation where I had my spouse was home. That a shore tour, doesn't happen often, but I was able to kind of pitch in and join Partners in Promise because I just really saw the need when we were talking about the needs of our exceptional family members and the caregivers, the family members. There's so much on everyone's plate in the military. You're asked to carry so much. And so when we think about those additional loads that are on top of that, it's like Michelle said, there's resources for the medical side, or at least there's pathways. There's pathways to get resources. So, if you need medical care, you're going to talk to your primary care doctor or TRICARE. There is a pathway to know where to go. But for the education, there really isn't a pathway. And so I'm talking with Michelle. We start working together. We've never met in person, by the way. We're going to hopefully meet in person soon, but we've never met in person. We're working on amazing things and trying to help our families. And in the middle of all that, on the personal side of things, we're in COVID, right? And so everyone is struggling educationally with their kids. And I have three children. I have a second grader, a kindergartner, and a 4-year-old who might come up if the internet turns off his show. But we have all these family circumstances in our lives, and we never think that maybe our family circumstance might crash along into our work. And one moment I'm thinking, my daughter, there's this behavior in her. She's not really paying attention, my oldest daughter, and she's having trouble focusing. And I had this little gut feeling along the way, even starting in kindergarten when we moved to this new location. Halfway through, I didn't know, because I'm not an expert. I didn't know if that gut feeling was real or if it was just because of the move and stress. So we trust the teachers. So I said, if you see anything, let me know. But I was, kind of passive. And then first grade rolls around and we got back a really, surprising test score in reading. And so we were very concerned, but we had no red flags other than just that gut feeling. And now I'm a member of an organization that is designed to help advocate for military children in special education. So I have every resource available to me. And I cannot imagine encountering this circumstance without a resource or a person to turn to know, you really actually, they have the best intentions. The teachers might have the best intentions, but they're not going to advocate for your children the way that you do. And you really do need to ask for what you need, and you need to know what to ask for. And if it wasn't for Michelle and others at Partners in Promise, I wouldn't have known what to ask for. And so now we're in the middle of our first IEP meeting process. I put one on hold because we weren't ready, but I knew I could. And so there's a lot about this journey. It's kind of, we joke at Partners in Promise that there's a lot of Harry Potter wand moments where you get that right wand and everything seems to make sense. And that's happened a lot. So anyway, that's a long story longer.
I mean, so much of what everybody has said here is so amazing to me, in the sense that, you think of our civilian friends that might not move and encounter those situations, in terms of the transitions that we go through. And we do that, and in the best of circumstances, it's still a challenge. But then when you start layering on, we're moving, and then you have children with an IEP or are part of EFMP, and then the Geo Bachelor situation, Michelle, that you were talking about, Heather, I know that you've done that. It's an added layer of stress, and I feel like myself, and I feel like you ladies also are very much like, we need to figure this out. We're going to just go out there and find answers, and you're going to be calling people, and you're going to be texting people, like you're going to figure it out. And not that makes that easier, but for all of the people that are like that, there are so many others that are just completely overwhelmed, right? With all of the situation, and they just don't know where to turn. And so then, I just have to imagine that the stress that they're under, not quite knowing what to do next. I know, Heather, I know you were encountering some of that, with your oldest son. And, I believe he has an IEP as well, and trying to figure out, what needs to happen. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was really resonating with Michelle's story because when all this started with the epilepsy, this led to a bigger diagnosis with my oldest son. Once they started doing the scans and they determined that he had a brain injury caused at birth. And then this led to more evaluation, which had all the processing disorders. And then he was diagnosed with high functioning autism. So when they're on the spectrum like that, and the schools don't really know how to label them, how to get them the help. We started the process in kindergarten, and this was the 504 plan with the help. This is something that they detected early on before the epilepsy started. But as we got deeper into first grade, the 504 plan, let me step back a little bit. The school district that we were in North Chicago, this is another problem. When you're in the military, you don't always get to pick and choose what districts you live in, what areas, for schooling and everything. So we did not know that much about the area. We put him in a school there that it was a nightmare. So we eventually, for first grade, we pulled him out and put him in a private school that was a little distance away. So when we fought to get the IEP or the 504 plan continued for care, it was a mess. I don't know what was going on in Chicago at that time, North Chicago at that time, but it became a fight over who was financially responsible for him because we lived in one district and he went to another. I've heard since then it's been resolved, but it was horrible at that time. I chose at that point because they kept pushing back the IEP meeting later and later in the year. We couldn't get services. They told me to pull him out of the school, a Catholic school that we were in, for half the day, to put him in a private or the public school down in the district that we lived in, which anyone that knows kids with processing disorders or high functioning autism, they need stability more than anything. And there was no way he was coping with the change. He couldn't handle the bigger public school down there anymore. So I got to the point, I was in tears. I had no one to turn to at that point. No one. There was nobody that could help me, could advise me on the best advice, what to do for him. I made the choice, and I don't know where it came from because I've never even considered this, but I made the choice to pull him out in homeschool. At that point, the school district that we lived in, or that he was going to school in, they made me feel, when they did the IEP meeting, that this was the worst choice that I could ever make. That he needed all these, the therapies. He needed the occupational therapy when he came to class. And what was I doing if I pulled him out? How would I manage that? So I took it upon myself to get, help out in town. I just went to we ended up going to Birth to 3 and Beyond for their services. And I went outside school, got all the services, started homeschooling. And since then, each time we move, we have had, to try to get him services to continue for the occupational therapy and things like that. They kept bringing up schooling and just really made me feel like I was being a bad parent, a bad mother. And again, that loneliness, you're in a unique situation, you're dealing with all these special needs anyway. No one, really knows where to turn or how to help you. And the support was lacking at that point. So I just continued on. It definitely is a struggle. And I did have a lot of military spouses that came to me for advice and questions. So I know that there's a need. I know that the loneliness, that they feel. And it's just very sad to me because the education part of it, you don't really get that much support. And when you are dealing with the EFM, I had to be the one that did all the education part of it. And I feel like, I feel like after doing the EFM and after the feedback that I got from some of the therapists that, at one point I was failing my son because I wasn't putting him in a public school. So again, that's another, that was another piece to it that just led me to feel, alone and not really knowing where to turn. So.
Yeah, I've heard a lot from the three of you talk about the isolation and the loneliness, that this kind of situation brings. And I think, Michelle, I think it was you that said that, the situations are so unique, like each child will have their own circumstance or their own, set, like, epilepsy and then high functioning autism, like it's this, mix. And so how are you figuring out how to tailor what you need or what to advocate for or what to ask for? And so I would actually pose to Jennifer and Michelle, like, if we have young parents that are watching or, are looking for resource, like, how do you start? Where do you begin? Kind of when you notice maybe something in your child and, want to help.
There's so many ways. Join Partners in Promise. That's how I would. That was my method. But reality, it's just knowing to trust your gut is the first thing. And some resources we've created have been more targeted to how you can trust your gut in certain areas. So Michelle, I'll defer to you on what your more seasoned experience, but taking a look at our resources would be a really great way to start. But as far as finding your tribe, Michelle is the one to talk
Absolutely. If you're a young family that's in the military, first of all, we've noticed that there's a stigma, right? A stigma of people coming forward to say they need help to enroll in EFMP because they're worried. They're worried that, if I'm in the EFMP program, I'm not going to be able, my husband or spouse will not be able to go to this location for their career. And so that is a tough thing. We need to get people enrolled in the EFMP because the benefits are there and we're starting to see standardization. And that's something that was in the 2021 NDAA, is that they need to have the same services available at every service branch. And I think now we put the spotlight on education. And so one thing that the Navy has done, the Marine Corps actually started this a long time ago. They recognized when they did a survey over a decade ago that their EFMP families were struggling. So they bumped up all their case managers. They have special education attorneys located on both coasts of the US. And that has really helped them, but they're a smaller service. So no one else really was following what they were doing in the Marine Corps. And then when my case came up in the Navy, they decided to do an EFMP pilot program here in the Hampton Roads area and also the San Diego area, because those are two locations for the Navy that are very heavy with EFMP families. And they structured this program for 3 years, and they've included a special education attorney to be available for families, a special education, they call it a liaison, but I would call it an advocate in the civilian world, someone who's thoroughly versed in special education law. And then they added a lot more case liaisons, those bottom case managers, the first person you would speak to at your installation. They can now attend IEP meetings. Okay, and I have to say that is huge, because when you're feeling alone and isolated, sometimes you just need someone beside you to kind of give you that check of like, am I crazy? Because I thought I said this. And you need that check from someone. Like, I don't know, it's hard to explain unless you've been through it, but I felt like I was the crazy mom for a long time. It's maybe that gaslighting of like, I said this, you said I said this, and it's just, finding out what your rights are. Then we have some great tips and tricks on the Partners in Promise website on what to do at IEP meetings. And one of them is always record your meetings, because there are so many times where I thought I said something and someone else said something. I don't worry about it anymore. I just record it, boop, and then I can just actually sit there and be present. And it's so nice to kind of look around, not write notes, and just know I can always go back and transcribe that meeting and just really ensure that I'm the best advocate for my child. So again, back to your question, Kelsey, you've got to get in the EFMP program. We need to know what is being offered through that EFMP 3-year service branch, and it should get easier. Once it gets standardized, all of them should have a special ed attorney. They all should have advocates or liaisons and just people there that can give you that one-on-one assistance. Because, I think that's something that Jen and I have talked about before, is that there's so many resources on the internet. There's Military One Source, there's like all this stuff, but you need a one-on-one person to talk to. You're drowning in all these resources, but your case is so individualized. You actually just need a person to speak to who can, talk about it, give you that feedback of like, yes, I think you're going in the right direction, or have you thought about this? I think we all want our kids to have, that great education. Well, I should say that the minimum education that the law affords them. And we all want them to be independent, productive members of society. That's the goal. We're not asking for the best education, we're asking for the minimum. And that's really something that all of our military kids should be having. It's just that layers that you're talking about, Kelsey. It's so difficult when you have so many other things. Sometimes you're just trying to keep your kid alive. And so then you're also trying to manage their education on top of that. So I would say get plugged in with us, get plugged in with your local EFMP installation, find out what they have to offer. And I know that if you need legal resources, come to us. We have some partnerships that we're working on, but those are some things. Just know your rights. Look at all our Trust Our Gut series, look at all the things that we have available in our tips and tricks, because it's complicated. Special education is not an easy law to understand. It's very specialized. It's very, some people call it boutique in a lot of ways. And so it's hard for the lay person to understand, what it is that your kids afforded. And because we're only somewhere 2 to 3 years, we don't really have a chance sometimes to go through those procedural rights, if that makes any sense. So we're already at like a disadvantage, unfortunately. So we're here to kind of help out with that, and trying to seek big changes from the top down so that we can support our families as best as possible. And so that the service member can actually like concentrate on serving their country, not worrying about their family and their education.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, that just speaks so well to, having someone that is really specialized. I love what you're saying about like having that person in the room with you, because sometimes that's really what you need, that support of somebody that may be able to hear something in a certain way and be able to speak to it and kind of validate what's going on. And I love that you guys are so specialized, because this community of care that I talk about all the time, but like the idea that, we as Kids Rank do what we do in providing programming and the social and emotional support. It's such it's such a complicated space. I would not begin to, tackle understanding, what that is. And so I can't tell you how grateful I am that we found you, or you found us, because to be able to say to our families, that are challenged with this and are, scared and worried and anxious, I have a resource that I can provide for you that knows so much about this. They, even if they don't have the answers, they can provide you. I know you guys deal more with the education side, but you have a coalition, and if you'll talk to me a little bit about the coalition as well, but like, if you can't get it, you'll know who to talk to, and which is fantastic. So would you tell me a little bit about this coalition that you guys are a part of?
Sure. So we formed in March of this year, not so long ago, the EFMP Coalition, and it's made up of a few different organizations that are all focused on the EFMP. And so whether that be on the advocacy side of trying, Modern Military Association of America, their area is to advocate for coverage for all children, LGBTQ, transgender children coverage in EFM. And also we have families who groups that are focused also on the educational aspect of things, the medical aspect. So if we don't cover the medical, well, we'll probably refer you over to Austin or Rebecca with the EFM and exceptional families of the military, So we have a lot of connections within this community. There's a lot of acronyms, so I'm going to stumble over them. I mean, all of them have like a national or a spouse or so we're going to mess up the acronyms every once in a while. Sorry, guys. But we all have each other. And, yesterday, a lot of members of our coalition were able to advocate on behalf of our families. And I'll let Michelle speak to that, but we're, compiling a press release today to give some more information to families about what that entailed. But it's a collaboration where if we don't have a resource and someone else is more case managers, we will share it, over to the person who can help you in a way that is meaningful. For example, one example is the coverage for autism. That has been in the news, the ABA coverage and changes with TRICARE, and that is huge. So, but not all of us can take the lead on it, and not all of us should. So we had one lead organization help facilitate that conversation on our behalf as a coalition. So we can all focus in on our subject areas and really do the best help for our families and just kind of work together as best we can. But Michelle, I'll let you, expand on that.
And you talked about it, Jennifer. I think what was missing from a lot of these conversations within the military service organization was EFMP. There's so many other issues happening with our military families, housing, military spouse employment, on and on and on. But really the EFMP piece of it was always kind of like, that's a secondary issue. It's just a small amount of people. We have 140,000 people in the EFMP program. And so we saw that, stronger, you're together. So let's find the other organizations that all have a focus somewhat of EFMP. That's their priority. And then together, at least we can always have someone at that table. And so that really was the thoughts, like, how do we unify and amplify the voices of our EFMP families? And the coalition was the way that we thought would be the best way forward in that. And sure enough, we do a lot of advocating on the Hill. And yesterday, we were fortunate, Partners in Promise, most of our coalition were present, as well as other EFMP families. I think we had 10 total, to speak in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Military Personnel Subcommittee. I know that's a lot of acronyms. We call it the SASC. And it was with Senators Gillibrand and Senator Tillis. And we got to talk about EFMP and our personal experiences. And it was such a fantastic conversation because they wanted to know about how it was affecting us. Was it helpful? Who's doing it right? what are the areas of concern? And hey, by the way, before you forget, write a 1 or 2 pager of how you want to fix EFMP. And so it was just a wonderful 2 hours of hearing about various service branches, how their own experience in EFMP has been. And, I think the difficult part about EFMP is that there isn't anyone doing it 100% right. It's so, again, individualized. You listen to 2 Air Force spouses, one that said everything was great at this base, and the other one's like everything was awful at the exact same base. And so, unfortunately, we just don't have the data to point to any one procedure or base or installation or school district to say they're doing it right across the board. So my hope is that the more we can put laws into place that can protect these kids and other type of resources to help families navigate, that will help. But I don't know if we're ever going to be able to fix, especially special education. It's in the community, that's an issue, particularly with COVID. I know everyone has had a lot of problems with accessing any type of education during COVID, but certainly military families get the brunt of it, because we're moving so much. And, I'll just throw out one, for instance, a lot of kids that lost instruction that past year. Right now, there's a lot of IEP meetings happening, trying to put in these recovery services or compensatory services. They call them all sorts of different names. But the problem with military families is you're moving. So guess what? You can talk about this with your current school district, but once you move with that IEP, the following school district doesn't have to give those recovery services, because you know what? They could have been open all year. They could have been like, hey, we're Florida. We were in school the whole time. Why should I be giving you extra services when we were doing fine here? So that's just another layer of how we are disadvantaged as military families in special education. And we're just trying to see what we can do to make change to protect them as they move, around from state to state, which of course is always fun too. All the different state regulations. It's hard. It's the overwhelming piece, as Heather said.
But at the
we're doing the best we
time,
can.
At the same time, there is this hope, though. I mean, I know it sounds like we're talking a lot about the negatives, and it doesn't erase, the hardships. But hearing from legislators, hearing from the DoD that they are looking to fix this program now. And so if family members who don't necessarily have the bandwidth to step up and do full-time advocacy, they only have the time for their own kid. And that is absolutely all that they need to be worried about. That's why our organization exists. That's why other organizations exist as well. And so if you have the time to share your story with us or another organization, that can easily be elevated to higher levels to help make an informed change. So it's not to say that, Michelle is telling her story, and her story is just one of many stories, but we are representing our whole community when we're in these meetings and hearing from our families. We hear from our families all the time. Some of them are overseas, and how do I deal with DODEA schools, not just public schools? How do I navigate the legal waters when the advocates work for the same company that teaches my child, so essentially. And so there's so many conversations we're hearing, but hearing them is the most important part of this conversation, is to hear your stories, hear your family's stories, because if we don't know that, like Michelle said, the data, if we don't have the stories, and either through survey data or through individual responses or emails, we don't know that there's a problem. And that's kind of been the story, is that people haven't been elevating their concerns enough. And now we are, and we would just encourage families to continue to share their stories with Partners in Promise and other organizations.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, that you would think, I think that the civilian world would think that within the military, like broader DoD, like that there would be the same. But, we are all part of Navy families. Yes, we're all Navy families. That EFMP has, what are they called?
Categories.
Categories, right. So my daughter was a category 4 when she was diagnosed, and those categories, tell you, kind of the degree of care that's needed, right? Is that right? So that when you go from duty station, so we actually almost didn't get to go be stationed in Japan because they were concerned that she wouldn't have the things that she needed if we were moving. And so, but I just learned like last week that that's only Navy has categories and other branches of service. So even within, this program, there are differences branch by branch. And so I mean, I would like to just, I'd like to hear a little from Heather, kind of where the boys are now. And I know that you've been learning new things,
Oh, yeah.
Even with your
Always.
20, he's 22.
He'll be 22 this year.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, and when you think that, like he's an adult, and so if you'd share a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things right before we left Virginia, that area, I was invited to, and I can't even remember if this came from the EFM coordinators or who let me know about this, but there was a workshop. It was an all-day class about how to transition special needs child from child to adult. And it was very overwhelming. There was a lot of information. But again, after I left there, I felt like I had more questions than answers because Hunter was, my oldest, is on such a spectrum, like he's so in the middle. He's not, I don't need to be a guardian to him. I know as a mother, that gut instinct all along that has helped me get him to where he's at, which, doctors told me at one point that he would never go past the 5th grade level, education level. And 2019, he graduated. So yeah, so anyway.
Good job, Mama. Good job.
So hard on herself. When I tell you she is an amazing human, like just in all the stuff that she's done and how she's advocated and really poured into her children, I know she'll cry, but she is amazing because her children, her middle son Logan is on our youth advisory board for Kids Rank. I mean, I just am blown away. And then she went back to school herself and got degreed. And I mean, so she doesn't value how much she's contributed, which I think a lot of parents when they're going through this don't. But okay, sorry.
I think it's when you tell a mom no. I think when they tell you that there's bound, like you're not going to go to this level or he's not going to, you're determined. You're a mother. You're going to find a way. So that's, I am very resourceful, and I think that's why along the way I've had a lot of spouses come to me and ask me questions, and I just didn't realize that there were so many of us, like we talked about before, but. Hunter, my oldest, his name is Hunter. He, one of the other issues is that he aged out of TRICARE. So when they age out, they drop the benefits, and the fear. I mean, my husband is still active duty and he is an RDC. So we knew we wasn't going to get to see him. We chose to relocate to our forever home back near Louisville, Kentucky. And with that, now, we're going through they told us just recently that we need to add him back to the EFM program, which we thought he aged out because he lives with us and he's probably going to live with us for a good while. He needs to be back on that EFM paperwork. So, with that, we moved home for stability so that, and I know Michelle spoke, you just want them to be productive adults in society and to be able to function on their own. That's your goal. So the thought of him, he was going to move back here near family so that he could get a job where he could have benefits and somebody could kind of watch him and kind of help him along the way. But, being a mom, I just couldn't separate from him. So I was like, we're going to go ahead and all move home and he can do, we can geo-badge. So that's what we've done. We've had amazing support. We actually got him on, this is better than I could have ever imagined for him. At Amazon, they hired him special need. We got medical documentation, accommodations, and he is thriving. He is doing so well. We are having to start all over with neurologists, all the continuity of care just to even get the EFM paperwork done. This doctor, I have to say this doctor didn't even know Hunter, didn't even know all his history, and had to do the EFM paperwork. That is another issue. There's the continuity of care. And we do believe, the last few years, we've had a doctor at one duty station take him off seizure meds. And then another doctor, the last one that we were at, he basically wanted to know why. So then you've got this fight and, it all boils down to continuity of care and their medical treatment. So we do believe he is still having seizures. And now we're in the process, and being a new patient, again, it's taking months to get in and to get all of this started again. So again, the lovely life of a special needs mom.
It never ends.
It
It never ends. It is
never ends.
just when you think you have one thing down, like when I thought I had the medical thing initially when she was younger down, and the education thing popped up.
Right.
And now that she's getting older, I'm seeing more medical things. And it's just like you bounce around from like one crisis to another crisis. Yeah, it's hard. And then you think adulthood, you know, and
I didn't think of
it's crazy.
adulthood until it was upon us. And I'm just like, okay, that's another whole level. And that's, you know, that's more resource, that's different resources. So
right.
the tough part is we had so many amazing resources in Virginia, in the Hampton Roads area, that we wouldn't have had in Chicago, and vice versa. I mean, we had just started like with ABA therapy in Chicago when he first started with all of this, and that ABA therapy therapists were rare. They were hard to find. We had amazing resources in Chicago, and then we got orders to Virginia, and we couldn't find an ABA therapist local. So it's just that nothing is, you know, it's just streamlined. It's just really, really hard. So,
Well, I mean, so we have about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to, or a little over 5 minutes, and I wanted to just check in with Partners in Promise to ask kind of what you guys have. I mean, the amount of work that you've accomplished over this short amount of time that you've been in existence is pretty astounding. And so I'd love to hear maybe kind of what's coming up that might be exciting or big, or, you know, you're really wanting to share. And then also maybe 2 pieces of advice that you would give young, or I mean, not even young caregivers, but I mean, you know, just families in general on what they, you know, just advice.
Okay, well, I'm so excited. Okay, so we did the survey last year. I'm a data nerd. So we ran our survey last year, and we got a lot of I'm a nerd, so I'm smiling. It's not happy, the news, but I'm excited about it. So we learned a lot about our families that we didn't know before. And one of the things that we discovered was a lot surrounding EFM and the program there, where there was not the amount of enrollment that we would expect. If we think about the 1 in 5, that number of families who have an exceptional need or a special need, and our enrollment numbers don't align with that. And so we wondered why. And so we asked those questions. Why are people not enrolling in EFMP when it's designed to be a benefit to them and provide resources? So there's money flowing here, and yet people aren't signing up for it. Okay, so why? And there were a few reasons that were all within the same sphere, and it all pointed to stigma. The stigma associated with enrollment in the program, and the stigma about special education, special needs, disability in general. And so, you know, this could hurt my career. I've heard bad things about the program. All of those things are related to stigma. So at Partners in Promise, we're like, okay, how can we can't just tell people to sign up for EFMP. We can't convince them that this is the thing. You know, we're working towards fixing it, of course, but how do you address stigma? It's talking about it. And so we're going to be launching a podcast this summer about stigma in the military. And it's not just for special education, although that is one area, because we know that stigma is pervasive. It's not something that's just in one area of life. It's all throughout our lives. We experience it in different ways, both internally and externally. So corporately, stigma can be felt inside of yourself when you're thinking about your own decision making. You think about how you view others, and then there's a corporate stigma that happens. So we're going to be talking about topics like pretty hard, heavy topics. Special education is one, and the discrimination that occurs within disability community. We're talking with members of different genders who have experienced discrimination, whether that is they're a service member, a female service member, and how does that feel for you being a female service member, having to make decisions to get out of the military because you're a dual family? How are you feeling like you're an Asian American and you feel like you need to be more American than a white person because people view you a certain way. So we're having these really hard conversations, and the title of this series of this podcast is Military Stigma, Tough Conversations Worth Having. And we really are so excited about this series. We're still recording, so if anyone is interested in reaching out to us to join the podcast, you'll have to talk with me for a little while, but I'm excited to personally learn from these conversations that we're having, and for others to learn how we can combat this stigma and help people access the resources that are available to them.
Well, to that, I mean, and then I'll let Michelle talk, but we've been talking a lot about the mental health stigma within military culture and really how it relates to the children. I just had this conversation with someone else saying, I have shared that, military children are more likely, 50% of our currently serving are children of veterans. And so, parents now are doing, military parents are doing the right thing. They'll send their children to therapy or those kinds of things because, they're dealing with anxiety or whatever, and kind of trying to get ahead of the curve, your mental health stability. And I know now some people on the other side, when those children are adults and trying to enter the military, that they can get flagged for potentially being disqualified for service because of mental health service. And to me, that's horrendous because they were doing the things that they were supposed to do to make sure that they were well adjusted, emotionally stable, all of those things. And now it could cost them their future. Same, so the discussion on the stigma around mental health in military culture, which is why a lot of our members don't necessarily seek mental health. I know that it's being worked on, but we really need to think about it in terms of the kids, because if you're disqualifying, all of these children that would potentially then be service members, I mean, that's on a small pool of people now that are volunteering to serve, you're really doing a disservice. So
especially now.
There's so much. I'm muting myself now because I'll just keep talking about our podcast if you give me the opportunity.
We only got a few more minutes left.
I know.
But so many things.
Ongoing conversation. We're beginning this conversation because there is so much information that's so relevant and really super important, and we can really dig into deeper. And so this is the beginning, just to kind of put the feelers out there, and then this network, I feel, is coming together beautifully. But Michelle.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thrilled about that podcast too, because we're not afraid of those type of conversations. I think we are the ones at the tables that are like saying, hey, not everything is going the way it's supposed to go at schools. I mean, I love schools. I love our teachers. I love everything about that. But I'm also not going to just sit there and say that everything is a bed of roses. So those are important conversations to have. So it's great. The things that are coming up. Jen talked about her survey. We need you guys, everybody, to take the survey, because the more EFMP families, we can get more data and really help on these long-term solutions for our families. That's coming up in late summer, right, Jen? About August, September timeframe?
Probably right after the holiday in early September.
Okay.
So it'll be open a month. So you'll have a month to take it. And I have no idea how long it's going to be yet, but we're working on it.
We're working on it. It's great.
Ohio
and
State,
it's,
yeah.
Oh, that's right. We did partner with Ohio State on this. And so it's super exciting. And the great thing about it is our survey last year helped to make change in the 2021 NDA. So this year we're focusing on those PCS transitions as far as what our recommendations are. As far as the IEP goes, we would love for our families to advance enroll with just a set of orders, not having a gas bill or electric bill or a lease or a mortgage. If someone's in Ohio, they're moving to Virginia, send over the written orders and boom, make sure that that school district knows you're coming and that everything's going to be in place on day one. Because that's what we saw in our survey is people are going at least a month, 4 months, 5 months without those services in place. And that is not going to help out our families. We're also pushing to hold on to those IEPs for up to 6 months or when the parent wants to initiate an IEP meeting, because a lot of our folks need that consistency and that schedule. And if, the way I look at it, that previous school district knew your child the best. And if these supports and services are helping them, replicate it when you get to that new school district, keep them in place, see how they do. A lot of times you're just moving. You may be still living in temporary lodging. So we're hoping that that would help that transition. Keep what you had, Then when the parent is ready to come together and say, hey, this is not working, or hey, this is working really well, let's continue it. I think that we'll see a lot of great things happening from that for our families on PCS transitions. And so those are kind of the big things. And you asked for two things. Make sure to find your tribe. So important in the EFMP family, whether it's spouse group, it's Facebook, whatever, find people you can confide in, because this is a very lonely, and it also keeps your mental health in check. So just know that you have someone that you can confide in and speak up whenever you can, whether it be the PTA or helping as a room volunteer, or, you know, to your congressional leaders. That's how we make change, is by speaking up. And so those are my two big things for folks who are just kind of going on this new journey.
Get involved.
That's
too. Get involved. It's not
if
just
you
about,
can.
yeah, if you can get involved in a small way, a teeny tiny small way, you have connection to that life, and it's not just something outside. You know, get involved with your tribe, you know, help them, and it helps you. Like, I know that sounds, it's so counterintuitive, but it's how the military spouse world works. It seems like, you know, we're all in it together, and we're here for each other.
We are a family. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Michelle and Jennifer and Heather for being part of our session on this important topic. And I really, it is an ongoing conversation. So if you have any further questions, we will be sharing information about Partners in Promise. I really encourage you to reach out and connect with them. And if you are having any, you know, issues with special needs or education, you know, IEP, anything in that realm, please reach out and get involved. You know, as I said, I mean, it's so important. You don't know what you sharing your story can mean to the collective. So thank you so much for your time. And we will see you next month, and have a great day. Awesome. All right.
Live's done. Thank you, ladies, so much.
Thank you.
Thank